As you move through the ethereal mists, they coalesce into a 20-foot tall silver door, heavily detailed with bas relief of a long-forgotten empire, barred with 5 golden locks hovering a foot or so above the floor. Jack, you notice a weight in your right hand and a silver key appears within your grasp. What do you do?
I'm going to investigate this key. There's got to be something on
I
it.
smashed it.
What? Smash what?
Hold on. I think it's important that
everything. I smashed the key. I smashed the locks, the door, the fourth wall. This podcast, I smashed them.
Not again. Come on.
Smash.
Welcome one and all to Roll Havoc. My name is Jack Steelman. I'm going to be your host today. And today we are going to get into the nitty gritty of what is quite possibly exactly half of all Dungeons and Dragons experiences. We're going to be talking about combat, and we're going to be talking about something very specific that does happen in games. We're going to talk about what makes combat interesting. Today with me, I got one of my best friends. He's all that in a bag of holding of potato chips. Welcome, Josh Plotkin.
Cool Ranch Doritos. Yeah.
And also here to talk about his beef with Count Strahd von Zarevich, it's the RDM, Ben Grunzel.
All right, Strahd, until you apologize, I'm going to keep sending adventurers to beat your ass. I know you're listening.
We have kicked his ass
so many
times.
That's why I run the adventure so often.
I had to know. I was
to be
like,
reminded.
Why does he hate Strahd so much? Because we just keep killing him. All right. So I think there's always got to be this balance between combat and RP, right? I think usually that's how a campaign kind of flows. But individual adventures will have sometimes they're more combat and sometimes they're more RP. But when you get to combat, there's this one thing that happens, and there's a particular style of game that ends up happening called what people refer to as the meat grinder, right? Now, I've heard this term, and I kind of get like a very specific visual in my head. It's of something that's just a whole bunch of whirling blades, right? And stuff just kind of gets shredded, and that's combat. But what kind of experiences do you guys have with meat grinders or with combat in general versus what makes combat interesting versus what doesn't? What do you guys think?
It's a really good question, actually. What makes it interesting? Because we talked about how like individual characters, they have their own goals, right? And by the way, like when you build a character, some of it has to deal with how they fight. Right, that is kind of those are probably the most like romantic part of the whole game, right? So I think it depends a lot on what you're up against, a lot on like the DM's shoulders. Wouldn't you say, Ben? Like, I mean, it has like combat varies greatly based off of how the DM presents it, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, so when you talk about the term meat grinder, I think of like a Final Fantasy style combat where you're just both sides hitting back and forth. There's there's not much in the way of positioning or tactics or anything changing round to round. It's like just
like a slugfest, right?
Yeah, just a slugfest. And especially when it's like when you start to see what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You know how much damage one side's doing compared to the hit points of the other side. And you can see, okay, this is going to be over in 3 rounds. We still just got to roll dice for 3 rounds.
Right. I think we have some very interesting examples of combat between the different games that we have. Now, obviously, talking about, say, the Middle Earth campaign, the combat in that game versus combat in the Forgotten Realms game that we're playing with Trevor and Jade. It's just like the combat is obviously going to be very different between those two settings. And like we talk about how Eberron was different. And we have just so much by the way of like characters between like Eberron and Theros. It's just like every single one of those settings seem to have some different feel to the combat. And I think we did a really good job of keeping those interesting. But what were some of those elements that like made those combat encounters interesting, really?
Mm-hmm. Well, Eberron and Faerun being on the exact same basically settings, right? 5th edition. We know why Eberron was a bit different because they had they had feats and ability score improvements, and then they gave a lot of magic items, and they were already kind of really crazy characters in the
Which
first
is like,
place.
yeah, it's versatility that grants to where you're not gonna just like sit there and like it's like punch somebody in the face over and over and over, because
But,
you
like,
have other abilities and other magic items, right?
yeah, but going into Eberron, we knew, like, at least as players, this is going to be grandiose. So we took that approach. I felt like I took that approach to all the combat, that this had to be very much a Conan-esque fight. That's what it's going to look like. Why? Because Ben is the one running it. I know what's going on in his head, right? And then also because, well, we've played our characters a certain way. It's okay for him to expect us to act accordingly, right? So in that game, I remembered, like, once I could, the goal was to stay out of range, create damage, and wait for the other shoe to drop, which is expect that something that you are not going to expect is going to happen, and make sure that your hit points are topped off by the time that type of thing happens. That was how I went about it.
I definitely, in that game, I try to do this in a lot of games, but with Eberron, because you guys are pretty powerful, but also I'm going for like these cinematic style fights. I planned a lot of the combats to be like 2-stage encounters, where reinforcements or some change in the environment would happen partway through. You're fighting one opponent and then a Kraken attacks or something like that.
A Kraken.
That was a 3-part encounter. We had like a skirmish that happened, and then we had the Kraken show up, and then we had the barbarian boss Dragonborn show up on top of that as well. Right. Yeah, so it was like, no, I didn't even notice that, but that's a really good point.
Yeah, so it's, there's dynamic stuff happening. Sometimes you guys aren't sure what the new opponent is up to, so it does provide role-playing opportunities.
Cool.
When somebody suddenly dramatically appears, it gives a chance to, for some quick banter, or it can like change the stakes, because like in that battle you were trying to get that prototype airship, and it kind of started off as like a stealth or charm your way, like kind of spy style, like go sneak into this auction and try to get it, and then a Kraken attacked. So obviously it's a huge shift in tone.
Surprise, Kraken! It's my favorite thing. Yeah.
And you had to figure out, and even at that point, like I'm like, Kraken might get the ship, you guys might get the ship. It's not set in stone at this point.
Okay, cool. I think one thing that's really kind of unique about the way that we play these games is that when it comes to like play styles, we always throw like party class composition out the door the moment we start talking about building a game. We're not like, okay, who's going to be the tank, who's going to be the heals, who's going to be the DPS. We don't do that. Like, we played with like a barbarian, a paladin, and a rogue. We play with a wizard, a ranger, and a monk. We play with actually in the Mass Effect game, we are playing with like a Krogan sentinel and a Turian sniper. So we got an upfront, but we don't have like, there's no healer medipack or anything like that. So it's like, we don't ever really try to game, because I feel like when you do that, you're trying to game the system. It's like, well, we got to have somebody to take the hits, and we got to have somebody to heal him. And it's like, that way we're never going to die. And then we got to have a wizard who's going to throw a fireball, clean everything up. It's going to be great. It's like, we don't think like that. But do you think that lends any kind of advantages or disadvantages for the way that we do combat?
Well, what is interesting is that we're talking in general just meat grinder, right? Yeah. Is that before 4th edition, you really couldn't do meat grinder, because unless you had a cleric, your party was not going to be able to go back out and adventure after a big fight for about a week. There's not a meat grinder effect. It's only in more recent versions that they even give you the ability to swiftly heal yourself back up without having to have a very specific class to do it, right? So that meat grinder had only been really created within the last, I don't know, 10
probably
years or so?
I think probably 4th edition might have been when that hit. Right? Yeah,
it's when you could start healing yourself. There was changes to like from Unearthed Arcana on 3.5 that was wound and vitality points that was invented basically to be able to make it so you could just have combat after combat as long as there wasn't a critical hit.
Yeah.
I mean, you if you had the right, again, you had to have the right build in third edition. You had to, if you could like give a cleric a wand of cure light wounds and suddenly they can heal everybody up after the fight. Some people, you could figure stuff out like that, but it's, you don't have, like you were saying, you don't have to have a healer in fourth or fifth edition so that you can really just do whatever type of party you want. And you're not, it's not going to be such a big detriment as it was in previous editions.
Yeah.
But your question was actually about how, what we approach it to make it not boring.
Right.
Was that it? Yeah. I think a lot of it has to do with what, like what the setting is, the DMs, like what their view is kind of on the whole idea of like, well, here's the rules of the game, but the game is also this, you can do whatever you want. So suggest what you want to do. For example, in the Faerun game, right? I have a character that can move large objects with his mind, right? The rules state you can move something in large 30 feet away, 30 feet, right? So my first idea was what I can pick something up, I can move it over something's head, and I can drop it. It's like, or cinematically, we can act like I am flinging something with my mind at the guy and doing that much damage, right? So we took something that was just a mechanic, right? And now I'm looking around every single map for something that happened to be drawn there that's large size to fling at people.
That's a good point. We always like bringing the environment into the combat is actually something I think Ben does really well, honestly. Like I feel like we've had especially like we got into Theros, and like Theros we had all sorts of stuff where we could interact with on the combat map. And I remember like we were in like some temple, and like I just mage handed a tapestry off of a column and it like fell on somebody and they were like grappled or they were restrained for that round or something. It's like finding unique ways to interact with the environment is a very important way I think you can keep combat.
And I think that's a key part of D&D that can get missed if you're like too caught up in the crunch and what your character's special abilities are, is that all the, the rules, I saw a term, I think Matt Colville said, the rules are an imperfect representation of what's happening in this fantasy world. The narrative, the adventurers fighting monsters or whatever, that's the important part. The numbers are just so that we have a baseline to talk about it. So yeah, you got to interact with the world, come up with fresh ideas. I think sometimes there's resistance to players doing clever ideas sometimes from the DM side because it feels like they're trying to like cheat or game the system, and it is like, DM has it is work for the DM to have to decide, is this fair or not? You have to make a ruling really quick, and like third edition was so robust in rules that a lot of times it felt like, well, if there isn't a rule for it, you can't do it because look at all these rules, they must have covered everything. And fifth edition is a little bit more stripped down. You could almost argue too stripped down in some of the skill stuff where it's really like it's up to the DM. And so you got to have a good DM and good players who are kind of like on the same page, which is almost a whole other discussion, but
which we've had a little bit.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, it's and I try to do stuff to encourage you guys to interact with the environment beyond just what beyond just rolling dice, because I think analogy I use a lot is if you're just trying to interact with the world by rolling dice, that's basically the equivalent of playing a video game. You're trying to hit the action button and see what happens, and it's like, no, tell me what you're doing. And if you have a cool idea, the other part of it as a DM is if players have a cool idea, more than often you should go with it because it's going to be cool. And you want to encourage player agency, and the players making choices that have an impact on the world is really the most important part of playing a role-playing game.
Doing something new, right? Doing something new and fun is really what makes it that's the satisfying part of it. That's the adventure part of it. So if you can get that in combat, that's a win-win for everybody.
That's kind of that's the whole goal, right? That's the point, is that like we're trying to flex these interesting decisions that we're making when we're given these scenarios. And like sometimes you can apply that to combat, and sometimes you can apply that to like any other interaction you're having throughout a dungeon or throughout like a role-playing scenario. So that's really cool.
Yeah,
being able to make decisions and not feel like the DM's going to shoot you down is a big thing.
Yeah. And I feel like you guys are good at too at doing like teamwork and working together as a group, as opposed to like just waiting for your turn to come up and thinking only about your own character. I wasn't sure if you guys had any examples that came to mind of from any of the campaigns of encounters where you guys came up with a clever idea that involved someone else, or saw how it worked, how working together as a team helped better than everybody plowing ahead on their own.
I mean, I can actually think of the Mass Effect game we're playing right now. And it kind of goes to like any game I played that was D20 modern or D20 future, is because they always come with skills like science or engineering, right? So the second you put those on the field, you're basically saying like, I can make machines. I can make things into things. I can make things out of things. And so in that Mass Effect game, we found like a bounty of things that were meant for basically a starship. And all we ended up using it for was we jury rigged it to shoot one time indoors to kill like 15 people. Right. So
and almost killed the sniper.
And almost killed
the sniper
in the process, because we were not thinking clearly about it. But what it was is I saw options, and I was like, there's the skills here to do it. We just need somebody to be able to do it. It wasn't me that was able to do it. It was being able to use an NPC.
I think another thing, and probably very most prevalent in the Eberron campaign, is that we're really good about coordinating position. And I say that specifically because we also had the followers. We didn't really talk about that too much. We had the followers in the Eberron campaign too. So it's like I feel like we do really well with like the moving pieces.
And I think it's like the coordination ramps up a lot based on the type of scenario. So for example, like, the Eberron, Faerun, Mass Effect games, our characters can run in and take some hits, but in Middle Earth, they cannot. That game is basically about how can we plan against this overwhelming enemy to defeat them. That's pretty much every single combat, right?
Yeah.
So we start most of every fight like where we run the scenario, because they're like that's the only way our characters can survive. My guy's an elderly scholar. They don't even have magic, like he can't do it. He has a dog. His dog is what hits things. He can barely hit anything in the first place. He needs to know how he can blow up.
And I play basically a ranger with no spells. So
right.
we can't go in guns blazing.
You guys picked the two classes that are not like combat based, which is kind of great, because you have the sneaky rogue stabby type, and then you have like the warrior type, and then you guys picked like the traveler and the scholar. And so it's just like, okay, like the combat in this, and I think it's done some really cool things for this game, because first off, I've given you guys magic items to kind of balance it out a little bit and make it to where it doesn't feel like everything is gonna just smash you into the ground. But also, we did I like to plan encounters for that would kind of fit like in a Lord of the Rings show, or like a Lord of the Rings like book or a story or something. So it's just like the one combat scene we did outside of Helm's Deep, where you guys were trying to like blow up these goblin tunnels. And that was just like a super fun, like we just said like, all right, well, the goblins are like, if you hit it, it's dead. Like, we're not even going to track hit points. Like little tiny goblins. So there's like a giant swarm of goblins. And it's like when you get to like the orc chiefs and stuff, that's when you're going to have to like worry about how much combat damage they're doing. And I feel like that was a really neat individual combat scenario, but I also felt like it was very fitting for the setting. And that, I think, playing on the strengths of the setting is also kind of one of those things that makes combat interesting, because the encounters you're going to have in Eberron, the encounters you're going to have in Faerun are not going to be the same as a homebrew campaign, or like a generic fantasy campaign, or Middle Earth, or anything else.
Like
definitely
that combat you mentioned, and like the other one after was about spiders that was before it, like those were literally just what I would consider in a normal D&D game. We would have approached it like a meat grinder, because it would just been like, we're gonna go kill that one, and that one, and that one, and that one, until they're all dead. And only because of the difference of the setting was it not that at all. It had to be something different. It had to be. Even if we had a character that was that Slayer class that could actually wade into battle. That's only one person.
Mhm.
They go down.
Right.
Same thing would happen. He's there. If you have one of those, it's not to make the game like normal Dungeons and Dragons. It's meant to have some type of front line.
Yeah, resilience, right?
And I feel like with that game, because like the exploration is so detailed and really built into and like specifically travel and like the hardships that can happen when you travel. Like if you had a party of nothing but buff warrior guys, but they didn't have the skills to travel, they're gonna end up getting to the orc camp with levels of exhaustion and lower hit points or something like that because they slept on rocks and ran out of food, versus we have, you know, the healer scholar guy and then the guy who knows the wilderness, and we can just get there fine. Like, you know, if anything, sometimes we've gotten like we've gotten better when we get to our destination than when we left, because we're specialized in that type of thing. And then it's just, you know, okay, now we're here, we're ready to go. You know, it's just different strengths, and again, yeah, like you said, it fits the setting.
Yeah, and so I think fitting the setting, there's also that like you kind of have to come to that decision, I think, as maybe a DM or maybe as the group, like, do you want combat to be high pressure, or do you kind of want it to just be like cinematic and super cool and you're just like smashing stuff? And I think you also have to like talk to the party. You kind of have to get everybody on the same page about like, all right, are we going to have just everybody around the same power level, or do we want to have one person who's just like one punch man? He comes in and like nails it while everyone else is kind of dealing with the rest of everything. And so that's a huge dynamic that you kind of have to come to an agreement as a party. And especially if like, okay, what happens when the teamwork aspect of it kind of falls apart because you do have maybe one person who's a little more powerful than the others. And it's like that, I feel like that's kind of as bad as like a meat grinder, where it's like your combat's always going to be the same. It's like, all right, yeah, no, the big guy's going to get the last hit every time.
Yeah, I see that a lot. That question come up a lot with like newer DMs who don't know how to handle one character who's way more powerful than everybody else, because then they try to up the combat challenge for that character and it's too much for the other characters. And that's a frequent thing. And it's kind of interesting because in like original D&D, you know, you only had like 4 classes. Only one of them was a warrior. Then you had like, you know, a healer, a skill monkey, and a spellcaster. And the idea, it led to a different play style. You were going into a dungeon hoping to get treasure and magic items, and you wanted to avoid fights. You had the fighter there in case you couldn't avoid a fight. But then like with 3rd edition onward, they wanted to make it a little bit more balanced. Every class was equally useful in combat, but that can lead to thinking that the only solution for everything is combat, which leads to more meat grinder stuff instead of thinking of other solutions sometimes. So it's just, you know, it's my biggest gripe with the D&D community sometimes is that there's tons of different ways to play D&D. And it's good to like check out, you know, how other people do it in other older forms of games or even other systems, just to like broaden your horizons and not think that, you know, because some people only play meat grinder and think this is just how it's supposed to be and I have to optimize and play that way. And yeah,
you know, they de-incentivize, I think, a lot of like they incentivize the meat grinder aspect in 3.0, right? And they actually did play down the ability to get past things, because like I remember, like if you're intimidating or diplomatizing in combat, you're at like a -10 or like something like that. Like specifically, like, no, we could make it so that I'm gonna say something to get people to drop our swords right now, because that's never happened, right? Ever. And we're not gonna kill each other, because all of us do like being alive, right?
Yeah,
you know, like that conversation was just not something that could happen like by the rules.
Right. And how many D&D combats are a fight to the death on one side or the other, and it's like that's not how real world fights go.
If you're against like the prototypical goblins and orcs, I understand it, because they're just like, I'm was built or bred for destruction and and that makes sense. But if you're up against anything else that's thinking, it's got to have a reason why it wants to kill you, and you should probably have a reason why you want to kill it. And then even thinking like that, at least as a player, like makes it so that you want to think of different potential solutions. I mean, I've talked my way out of so many different fights that should have happened simply because it's a better story if I could actually talk myself through it. Even in a character that's built to smash things.
Yeah, you guys are really good at talking way out of fights, making uneasy alliances sometimes. I love that in the Haka adventure when you guys teamed up with one of the Emerald Claw necromancers to fight the dragon, because it made sense. Even though you're playing a paladin and a holy barbarian, you guys would have been totally in your rights to do the lawful stupid thing of like, no, we just have to kill everything that's evil. Like, no, you guys decided to team up with a lesser evil to fight a greater evil. I think she ended up trying to betray you and got eaten by the dragon anyway, but
yeah,
all according to plan.
I felt like it felt cinematic and interesting.
Yeah.
Actually, can I go back? You were talking about, I think, like the idea of having the one overpowered character versus all the other ones. Mm-hmm. And for me as the player, when I'm not the overpowered one, which I mean, I'll be honest, sometimes I am. And in like some cases I would think I would be, and somehow somebody is even more. It as a player, it lets me relax in thinking like, we don't got to care about that guy for a little bit. And I think it basically, if the DM is on the same page, then they'll have big scary monster and others little monsters. And then big scary monster will be all about that guy who's a problem, and then everybody else can spend their time actually dealing like what the actual combat would have been if you were all balanced characters. And then you can get back to the scary epic thing that hopefully by the time you're back to it, your guy is actually almost dead. And so is that thing. And that usually only happens in.
And then you have it like an Avengers Assemble type moment. It's like, all right, everybody buck up. It's time to take down the big bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In a way, it is just the natural progression of what the original one was, which is this guy is here for if there's a fight. We just know now there's always going to be a fight, and we have this guy here for when that happens. It's like maybe they don't role play all that much.
Yeah.
Or maybe they do. Maybe they're the life of the party at the same time.
And I think that, there's something to be said about the campaign style you decide to play right from the get-go. It's like, all right, are we gonna this Faerun campaign, we said like right off the bat is like, I'm not gonna like put a lot of effort into creating like background for the characters and for the setting. I'm gonna give you guys monsters to smash. And the idea I had was literally like Monster Hunter World meets Forgotten Realms. So it's just like some crazy magical anomaly has happened that is now just creating crazy hybrid aberrative monsters, and you guys are monster hunters for money, and that's what you're doing. It's just like, you could not get anything like more. We're going to be fighting monsters, and
we wanted as much anime-esque violence, and so we get to describe all the awful things we're doing. And so in that way we've wanted the meat grinder, because we've focusing on grinding that meat as fun as possible.
We've leaned into it at this point, right? We're making
like, special sausage.
Yeah,
I think this game.
The problem and it's actually an interesting thing. I want to know what you think about this. Like, the problem I think we're having with this is that I'm throwing like decently sized creatures and like challenges at this party, but there's this weird balance where it's just like they never blow their cooldowns to like make it through the fight, but it's not like the fight is necessary. It's not like they're not getting the shit beat out of them like every other round. So I was like, there's that balance where it's just like, it's not a meat grinder, but like,
I mean, if you want to talk truth from player to DM, I hold my like once per day cooldowns pretty much on any character ever until the absolute moment I need to.
Yeah,
they are literally the last ditch effort, because I'm like, all right, all the stops now have to happen, because up until that last hit point, Nothing else, they're all the same until that last hit point.
Yeah.
That's interesting because third edition on kind of encourages like the, go Nova right away, use your biggest stuff. And especially if this is kind of like it sounds like it's kind of a episodic campaign where you're just going after one
Contracts.
monster or a group of monsters. So like it would almost make more sense just to use your biggest thing right out the bat. Which is, it's not cinematic at all. Like that's not how
No.
the
It's
Power
very-
Rangers don't just get in their sword and stomp on the monster right away. They build up to, anime always keeps building and building and building. And
Anime, you end up somehow with a stronger opponent and protagonist at the end of the 20-minute fight than somehow they began with, because they found that secret strength deep inside. And I think a lot of people really like that. It's satisfying. It is satisfying to me. That's why I do it. But also in Eberron, I just wasn't sure exactly how long something was going to go. And so that's why I was always like, I'm going to stand back here with my 100 speed and I'm going to bounce in and out of combat. I'm not raging for anything.
The thing is, we probably caught on to his trick where he was like, no, middle of combat is something's going to happen. Right. And it's just like, no, I'm not going to. But everybody's going to stand close to the paladin within 10 feet.
I only have 5 rages
until we hit the next form of this boss fight. And then we're going to see what happens. It's like go from there.
Yeah. But it also, it leads to a more cinematic fight because, in any action movie, like they don't just open up with the biggest salvo of thing they can do and then use their at will powers for the rest of the fight. I mean, that's not interesting. And like Theros is also kind of an interesting, we were running the Theros game for a while, and that one was designed to be very episodic, where each adventure was like the gods leading you to, you finding a new place where the gods were in conflict and you have to resolve it. So you could be pretty sure that like if you came across a big monster, that's going to be the big monster of the fight. So it does lead itself differently than if you're doing like we've never really done like a mega dungeon, although we've done some fairly big dungeons in the Eberron campaign, kind of where it made sense. I mean, even Ravenloft is a big dungeon. But it leads you to a different style of play in terms of how you act as a party, what abilities you use, how your tactics, how conservative you are.
I remember this was in another Eberron game that Ben was running. I was playing a Minotaur Rune Master of the Devourer. I remember this. Okay. So I'm not going to go into the rest of the story, but we did get to this like frost dungeon at one point, and we're a monstrous team of have like an evil demon. We had me at this. But that was one of those ones where it was built like, do not just run through, open up the doors, because you're going to die if you do that. And pretty much like, I remember that team because of 4th edition, like that's what you did. You just ran in, you blew all your cooldowns because you got them back after that combat. It was just kind of guaranteed, right? You blew, and that was one where we actually did sneak around in it. And I remember there's like a thing where it's like just a bunch of frozen people, and we were just so terrified at the idea of like going in there, of like what's going to happen when we go in there. So it's like that was a meat grinder, meant to be a meat grinder, and it was like taken back just because of the aura was different in this dungeon.
Yeah, I think that was a 4th core adventure, which was so 4th core was like started by a couple people that basically wanted to. It wasn't even trying to do old school combat. They just wanted it to recreate like the meat grinder, almost video gamey experience in 4th edition. But I thought it was really interesting because it showed how flexible 4th edition actually was, because a lot of people said like you can't design for 4th edition. It's you can only play it this one way. And it's like, no, you can make like a really tough dungeon where you have to be conservative with your powers and make tough choices, and it kind of inadvertently felt like old school D&D because you're like, all of a sudden you're not super powerful because there's epic level acid traps everywhere, and you have to decide which flagstones to step on, whatever. And Yeah, and you guys knew that going into it. That's and that communication about what play style is so important. You always got to talk about the stuff with players, but you kind of have to be like, hey, this is going to be a tougher adventure. It's not, we're not doing the cinematic run in and chop everybody's heads off thing.
I also remember I got this sweet hammer from that room with Ella that like once per day could knock a person 100 feet away or something like that. It was the best. It was the best. See, because I was a follower of the Devourer, who's the evil god of storm, basically. So I got this lightning hammer on top of it. So I was like Thor in. Yeah, it was sweet. Another sweet game.
Yeah, and it was one of the principles of fourth core was like big challenges, big rewards. So they had just ridiculously over the top magic items you could give.
Yeah,
which was cool. It felt like, playing like a God of War game or something like that, where
felt very special.
It's tough, but once you get done, you have awesome stuff to show for it.
And then giving me that, I remember again, giving me that tool made it so every combat after that point was a different way, because I was thinking, where is a trajectory where I can blast an opponent 100 feet away from me?
Yeah.
I always really like when you do have something kind of unique about a character in the items that they have that just really just affects the way they approach combat, right? And sometimes it's something like over the top like that, right? And it's just like they have this crazy magic item. But I also think maybe sometimes it's something like a little surprising. I remember this one shot we did where it was the paladin, the ranger, the orc, and the changeling. What was that class with the murder shrimp?
Summoner from Pathfinder.
Summoner, yeah. But we got into this like combat, and it was Ben had these I guess they were gladiators come out, and they just like they're fighting with the ranger, and like one of them actually gets like a successful like weapon sunder on his like magic longsword that I had been using for like the entirety of this adventure. And then I'm like, that sucks. I pull out my short sword. That's almost the exact same thing. And it's just like, well, because that's the character type. Like he's a ranger. He's prepared for pretty much any combat scenario he can get himself into, as well as he can be. So I think stuff like that is just like, it's when you have quirks or neat equipment on a character, like that also just makes combat more interesting.
So that ranger basically said, I'm here to grind meat. There's no way you're going to stop me from doing it.
Yeah. One of the first third edition games I ever played in was I played a samurai, and I just figured, I want to be prepared for any scenario. So in addition to my katana, I also had a naginata, which was a polearm, and and a blunt weapon and a bow. I was just like anything that came, like something would come up and be like, use your ranged weapons, and like the other warrior would be like, I forgot to buy, all I have is a hammer. I forgot to buy anything else. And I'm like, are they within 10 feet or 100 feet? I'm prepared for either situation. Like, and you don't have to have like even special equipment for that. You can just do that with mundane equipment and still feel like you're doing something that, because it's just like realistic. Like, well, how would my character do this in this world? I would just come with extra equipment.
How would we handle this situation? Yeah.
Right.
No, that's really cool. I think, well, and then, it's, you get to higher levels when you have, magic items, and it's like, then you have to start taking like wall climbing, flight, swim speeds, like all this different, like potential environmental and like terrain type situations. And it's just like, those are all elements that you can use to keep combat situations from feeling stale. And it's just like, it does kind of come down to like, all right, what you got on your character.
And like, I usually make characters that I want the DM to put those challenges in the way for me. Like there's a reason why my character has boots of striding and springing. It's like, I came here to jump over weird obstacles. I came here to do like, there's a reason why my character can move 100 feet. I am planning on running on walls to get to places I need to go.
Right.
So please put those in here. Please make it so that's a fun challenge that like my character build just is successful at, because I thought about it.
Yeah.
Or the wizard can cast fly. And then
That could be kind of an interesting thing, because like as a DM, you don't necessarily want the world to be like tailored 100% to the players. You want it to feel like a real world and not just this whole world was built to challenge you specifically. But at the same time, like if you have players who can do a cool thing, let them do the cool thing. If they're specialized to fight a certain thing, make them fight that thing so they can feel badass. Like, you don't want to like counteract something cool that a player can do because you think, oh, well, that ruins this adventure. And it's like, but they built their character to do that on purpose. Like, if you did an Indiana Jones movie and like, didn't put any traps in it, it'd be like, what is this?
Mm-hmm. He's just strolling through.
Just walking. Yeah.
No problem at all. Just pick this
I
up.
found it. It's right there.
Yeah,
The
there
gold
it is.
I
idol,
wonder
it's
why
right there.
nobody has done this before.
Yeah.
Oh
He's
well.
Weird. Yeah.
Hey, Indy, did you bring your bag of sand? No, I didn't bring my fucking bag of sand. Look at this thing. It's just sitting here. I think we do a great job talking. I think we do a great job dealing with combat in every campaign and every setting that we've come across. I think we always have a good time. I don't think combat has really felt stale or boring in any of the games that we've played. And even if it is, like, it's never more than like maybe a encounter in a adventure, in a single adventure. And it's just like, and it's because one of us is just like, we didn't know exactly like how to handle what was going on. It's just like, okay, well, it's like, we'll move on to the next one.
It's, we are all people too. So like our energy levels vary greatly based off the time of day or the experience we had prior. So like maybe one day that was the best combat ever for me. And maybe the next time like I'm tired and I kind of know how this is going to go, so, and then you just like, so, it does vary a lot. Like and that's the thing, is to always, at least for me, is always to be appreciative of the opportunity nonetheless to hang out with your friends and that someone's actually even still willing to get you, they put these monsters together, they're running them, so it's like give them enough respect to at least finish it off, and that kind of makes it entertaining to me too, about like figuring out like, well, what were they thinking as a whole for this whole thing, it's not just this one fight that I'm like might get tired of it. Like it's because I'm so overwhelmed maybe by everything else that happened before.
Right. Well, as much as I love grinding up all this meat with you gentlemen, I think it is now time for our next segment called Gain Inspiration. I think Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop RPGs are gaining a popularity so very fast now, with stuff like Critical Role out there, with the new show that they just came out with all the celebrities that are now involved in like tabletop RPG streaming and podcasts and all these different types of events. Like when people find out that like, Vin Diesel was like a huge like D&D nerd, like you find stuff out like that. It's like, it's making it to where people are more interested, like it's becoming more mainstream, and it's just, I think it's kind of a cool thing. But I also realized, like, I remember getting into Dungeons and Dragons it was hard to find people to like play with, and when you did, like, you didn't always like mesh with them very well. So what do you guys think about like getting into a new game, and like what advice would you have for people who are just starting out playing Dungeons and Dragons? Maybe they found a group and it's just like, what would you tell people like to expect, or maybe some advice for people who are just getting into it?
Let's see. I there's a lot to say. I think that's why I was just chuckling here and not saying anything. But there's two main rules that are really important. Dude, this is a game. 2, he's in charge. Like that's like, then I'm pointing at the DM.
You can't tell he's pointing at the DM. Because there's every bit of frustration I have ever seen in a game when it comes to no matter how long I've known the person, is all about the fact that they invested too much of themselves into something about this working out for them. And then they went to the rules of the game
okay, thinking that it's going to work, and then the DM says no because they didn't read the part where the DM is in charge. Like it's, you know, and that's where all the problems come from. That's where all the things that make it so it's not fun. That's where all the things where I've seen bad experiences happen that burn people.
Yeah.
They'll come from that. Those two things.
Yeah, I think spinning off of that, it's a group experience. So you got to be careful with the expectations you bring into playing, because yeah, you might have an idea of how your character is going to go, or how even rule stuff, and it's going to change from group to group, from DM to DM, even from campaign to campaign. So it's it's telling a story together at the table. It's cool having a lot of thought put into a character, backstory, character art, whatever, but you're one person of many at a table of what are supposed to be friends, playing a game.
Yeah.
And telling a story about what happens during that game. So yeah, just go into it. You got to go into it open-minded, and you want to be able to riff off of unexpected things, and be willing to change your idea of the story and your idea of your character even based off what other people are doing, because it's an ensemble cast and you got to be part of that.
Right. I think that's kind of an important thing as a beginner, is to kind of just like have that open mind about all the stuff that's going to come up. Like you're going to have to learn the rules around like combat and movement. You're going to have to figure out like what your character can and can't do, what your character's specialty is. Like I feel like once you get through the character creation process, you might have an idea of what that is all like. But if you're just kind of rolling into it, because sometimes if you're rolling into a game for the first time, you might have pre-made characters, you might not know what's going on. But I think leaning into that, you find if you're presented with a scenario and the person who's running it, the game master, the dungeon master, whatever, they prompt you to have a reaction in character, I think you should lean into that. I think that's very important. It's like, 'cause that's at least half of the fun. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are into like, I want to play this, like I think people sometimes go into it thinking it's like a board game, right?
Yeah.
Where they're like, it's a grid, we've got pieces and dice, and so it's like a board game. It's like, it's not though. It's like there's so much else that goes into it. So I think it's kind of cool to like lean into every aspect of that, find out what you like. Like personally, I really enjoy RP. I think something else that probably helps, and Ben mentions this all the time, is that it is supposed to be a group of friends, and it is a lot easier to convert your friends into playing a tabletop RPG than it is to go make friends who already play tabletop RPGs. At least it used to be. I honestly think it might not be so hard anymore. I mean, there's like so much social media where you can connect with people who are into, anybody who's into like modern pop culture will probably be able to very easily find other people who are into Dungeons and Dragons.
There's a lot of looking for group post-its on at the gaming stores.
I actually think both are probably easier right now. It's probably easier to talk your friends into trying Dungeons and Dragons because, or any role-playing game, because it's more popular right now. But also there's just so many more people playing. It's okay to try different groups and see what style works for you. You're not stuck with just, the sweaty guys in the back of the comic book shop anymore.
Yeah.
There's probably multiple places to play in person or online that you can try out. And there's so many different play styles between groups. I think I hate seeing people get locked into one play style, or worse, having a bad experience with one group that's really just not meshing with them, and thinking, oh, this is what Dungeons and Dragons is, I don't want to play. And it's taking that spark of, I've seen so many horror stories of somebody's really interested and just has a DM that makes a crappy ruling, or oh, these people want to play this way and I was expecting to play a different way, and thinking that's the only way to do it. There's tons of way to play it. It's an imagination game. Yes, there's dice and there's a framework for the settings, but there's tons of ways to play it.
I've also thought that if you're the type of personality who's okay with just being explained things to, you adapt to these games very fast. because literally taking that information from other players directly and actually like learning from it, that the ability to do that is very important for like your uptake on how things go.
Yeah.
It's a lot faster than trying to just read through the book.
Yeah,
Not
don't think
that
you have to memorize
Yeah.
the player's handbook before you start
Yeah.
playing. Just ask somebody to play and you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Most of the time, like with rules on anything, I just write down what it's called. And if I really can't remember what it does, then it's just there for me to look up. Like
Yeah.
there's no way to
Right.
remember everything about this game. Just
No.
that you roll a d20.
Yeah, and especially like the way things are now, it's like there are not just for Dungeons and Dragons, but there are like starter box sets for so many games now where you can literally just like they'll give you like 3 adventures, maybe some like character sheets, and just like here's your like your introduction to a tabletop RPG. You have to put virtually no work into like getting it set up. The rules will be very easily, very succinctly explained in like a pamphlet, and it's just like there's stuff like that. Every edition of Dungeons and Dragons has had one of those, and I think Pathfinder has some too. I've seen the one for Starfinder. So there's a lot of resources out there commercially for people who do kind of want to just like get into it and jump into a game. What did you guys start with? Like what got you like what helped you learn is what I want to know. Like when you were starting out, did you have just like particular books, or did you have particular like any like references or people?
Yes, I started like really early, like elementary school is when I first started getting
Right.
interested. And I bought like a few random books that like were probably even different editions. So I was really I was just like, oh, this is cool fantasy stuff, and kind of pouring over it. And then I got the like 1991 basic D&D starter set, which was just like a revamping of the basic D&D level 1 through 5 box set that they've done since early 80s when they split the lines. And it had like a learn the game by running through an adventure, like almost like a choose your own adventure style thing to teach you how to play the game. And then it was like, okay, you've done this, now get your friends and teach them how to play. And it was so great. I mean, and I immediately did that and I've been DMing ever since. So I wish there was something out there right now that was that helpful, but also there's lots of really rules light games out there. Like D&D can be kind of intimidating. It's pretty robust, and yeah, you can start with a starter set, or you can ask around about other games. There's so many games out there. I mean, I thought there was a lot of games when I was getting into role-playing games, and there's just so many more now, and some of them are super light and dirt cheap, and you can pick it up and learn it super fast.
We've experimented with some of those too. Like it's actually really fun to kind of just like jump into those systems that require much less just crunching at all. It's so nice.
It's really fun to learn another like user manual. Basically. Yeah,
for sure.
It really opens you up, because it kind of makes you realize like that any of the rules are arbitrary. And not to say they're not important from game to game, but the systems are, we've decided to plot the world in these parameters, and you can re-envision that. And it really opens up how you run games.
One thing that kind of helped me just kind of figure RPGs, tabletop RPGs out in general, just kind of like getting a feel for the generic sense of how all tabletop RPGs are, is like honestly like board games. Like there are some board games that have kind of helped me kind of just get that feel for a tabletop RPG without actually having to like construct a story or construct a character or anything like that. The Hero Quest was a big one for me when I was little, and just like so happy that they re-released that. And recently the advent, right, it's so good. But more recently the adventure system D&D board games that came out around fourth edition, those are all really cool because they're almost a meat grinder. That's almost what they are. But
there's interesting stuff that comes up in each one, like that surprises you and makes each playthrough different. Which
Everything,
is cool.
yeah, it's all randomized. You're just running through randomized dungeons, and it's really neat. It's always really cool. It's really fun to do that as well.
And Josh,
Yeah.
I know you started back at, like with 3.5, right? When you were
Yeah.
an adult.
I read, I'll be honest, I read all those books. I read all of them, like back
That's
to
what
front.
that was your learning method. Like
I
you
did.
you
I did.
textbooks.
I played with people who just knew the rules so well already. Like, and I don't know, like I said, I like the game. Like
That's
it
cool.
clicked for
Yeah.
me. I read all those Splat books, and then every book that they had available, basically. And I think it was only starting with 4.0 that I didn't read every single book, because like before, like a Monster Manual would come out and I like would read everything on it, and then I realized like, oh, now I just like have to act surprised with monsters, because I'm not, I don't run games most of the time. But it's so like I just tried to make it a little more of a mystery to me, is that when I have a question now, I have to go like look it up for the current iterations of it. So that's why I remember everything from 3.5 so vividly, is because I all first-hand knowledge. Thank you. First-hand knowledge. That's what I'm looking for. I'm a bit tired.
That's a very different approach to like just read through the entire 3.5 like core set. That is a very crunchy way to learn how to play tabletop RPGs.
It's a user manual, just like if you have like a for an engineer, like they have to build an engine. Like basically, there's a manual of how to build the engine.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, that's pretty common, I feel like, for any, especially when you're a little bit on the younger side and you get into a new hobby, you kind of just want to devour it.
Yeah.
Anything you can about it and learn all about it, which is a totally valid way to go too. Like there's tons of really crunchy systems out there, and you can really develop interesting stories and characters by diving into the mechanics and applying them to the story. You can also go the other way and do light stuff. So it's, it could be a little hard to find what's right for you, because there's so much stuff out there, but it's out there.
Yeah.
Keep trying.
One thing I think it's very important for new players to remember is that your character is going to die. Your character is going, a character is going to die. Like,
have you been reading my notes? I really wrote that down right
Did
here.
you? I'm sorry.
You are going to die.
Like your character, and it's sometimes it's epic and sometimes it's shitty. And
unless you play a half-orc zealot barbarian and get up to high level, then it's literally impossible.
I broke the game. I did it. I finally did it.
I was like, now I'm wondering, why did you have that note?
Yeah.
It's like,
but even that's like an expectation saying of different play styles are going to have different character lethality, and it's like if you've come up with this awesome backstory for your character and then you die in a pit trap in the first dungeon room, you're going to be like, wow, this isn't the game for me. But it's like, well, maybe it's not the table for you. Maybe, versus I'm like, oh, I get to roll up a new character. There's different styles. Some people like just rolling up a character and running in, exploring the dungeon is the interesting part, not exploring your character.
What's your level cap for like cannon fodder? Because like if a character is under level like 7, I will literally just like roll the exact same character and change the name. Like
this is his brother.
Yeah.
I don't like I've seen that. I don't know, like I have so many characters in my head that I want to that I have like ideas for, that I always want to come up with something different, even if like it's like, oh well, okay, this character died right away, I was looking forward to that. But it always, I don't know, like there's some classic, like Melf the elf was like the third elf that Luke Gygax had created and died. And he just kept changing the first letter of the name and recreating the exact same character. And so there's some classic
he got all the way to level 30. He got all the way to level 30 with Melf the elf. It was great.
Yeah.
He invented an acid arrow, guys. Come on, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
And I think Big B of the hand spells was like one of many wizards whose name rhymed with Igby, and he was the one that survived the high level. Always seemed a little weird. It would feel cheap to me as a player, but obviously it's it's
I think
whatever you want to do.
Well, that's why I'm saying like up to level 7, I don't care about this character. Like if it's just like it can die, and then like I'll probably just like if I want to stick with it, I'll just remake him, or maybe I'll make something else. But like I don't.
Yeah,
when it gets
level
to like
7's 20. Right?
once you hit like level 8, I'm just like, all right, no, like that concept needs to retire, because that's a life of adventure.
Well, that's also like at what point do you get access to resurrection magic? Because then that's earlier on, it's like, well, you don't have much of a choice. If your character dies, your character's dead. Once you get up to a certain level, resurrection, it's in D&D, it's easy to resurrect your character.
That's fair.
Even if it's tougher at like that mid-level, and you have to go on a quest for it or sell off a magic item to be able to afford it or whatever, like it's part of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
true.
It's very interesting when you talk about life and death in a fantastic setting, a fantasy setting that is literally just like, no, like the walls, like, but the veil between life and death is very thin because magic exists, like you can just reach
even
through.
Like even like grittier games like Warhammer Fantasy, which is all about like you're not a super heroic character. You never will be. You're kind of like, you can like literally be a rat catcher as like your profession when you start off, but you get like fate points that keep you from dying from bad luck. So there's different ways to mitigate it in different games, and even high lethality games often come up with ways to avoid getting a cheap shot.
Yeah. To make it fun. Like you have a chance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably why they put it in there.
So I think that's our advice to beginners, is like, make it to level 7 before you
or talk with your if you have a chance to talk with the table, like what's character lethality like in this game? Is this an old school watch out for everything, your character can drop any moment, or did everybody write epic backstories for their characters at level 1 and nobody's expected to die? Even if you had everybody taken out, you can assume that everybody's been captured and will have a chance to escape. Like these are different ways to play, just different ways to play D&D, and none of them are wrong.
You have a fate.
Yeah.
That's a great point too. It's like when you get into a tabletop RPG, no matter what the system is, it's important to realize that it's like there are going to be many different ways to play this game, and if you get lucky, you'll find a group that does it in a way that's fun and will keep you wanting to come back for more. And if you're unlucky, like which most honestly every person who plays tabletop RPGs is unlucky at least some of the time, where they come across a group where they just don't mix with, and it sucks if you can't find another group right away. So it's just like, I don't want to deal with whatever's going on in this game until I find something better. So you just got to remember, like there's multiple ways to play this game, and one bad group shouldn't spoil it for you.
Right.
Yeah. You should spoil it for them.
Definitely spoil it for them. Become just become the most powerful person at the table. School all of them, and just make sure you ruin their lives. That's how you do it.
Yeah. Just level up faster in a nicer group.
Yeah.
Kill more boars. That's how that works.
Yeah.
Live to win.
All right, gents. Do we have any other advice for the beginners before we get out of here?
Buy the books. Spend the money and give it to the artists or company or whatever that made it.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Buy the books.
Yeah. And just remember, you're sitting down with people to play a game, and it's a group game. You want to have fun. Everybody else there wants to have fun. If you're not having fun, talk about it or find different people. Just you're hanging out with people. If you're not having fun, hang out with different people, but don't ruin their fun either, just because you want to have a different type of fun.
It's your time. You're choosing to be
Right.
there.
Yeah. It's just a game. It's not,
Right. Well, guys, I think this has been a fantastic time. I'm so glad we got a chance to sit here and talk about combat and the early days of getting into Dungeons and Dragons and how it's different now and what people can expect when they're starting to get in. But I've had a great time. This is Jack Steelman reminding you all that when it comes to acquiring new skills, the internet is no match for good old-fashioned demon summoning. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Roll Havoc.
Bye.